The work of the architect amazes me. An architect has to be an artist whose canvas is the landscape and his medium are the buildings and structures that he places on it. And back in 1980, John Woodworth said, "This is what I think a college should look like." He wanted to create a space that was both welcoming, yet a collegiate experience. He wanted to create a space where you could find some solitude and peace and quiet, or a place where a gathering could break out. He wanted the people that came here to find a welcoming place, people from small town interior British Columbia, but still be able to experience the university environment. To find out about the things that influenced John Woodworth through his life here in the Okanagan, we talked to him tonight on Pioneers and Places. Welcome to Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with my guest for today, John Woodworth, who is a practicing architect in the city of Kelowna for about 35 years. But in addition to that, he's an author of a best-selling Canadian book called The Remodeling Game. He's an environmentalist, and he's got just a neat story. And a story, I think, John, that is so appropriate because things can be bad and get better. Things can be the way they think they are and change. That's really the story of your childhood, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
Kildare Cottage was the name of the home you lived in when you were just a kid, right here on Manhattan Point.
That's my earliest memories. I know we came on a train from Vancouver. It must have been about 1928, and we moved into this big log house on the beach at Manhattan Point, which is now destroyed. But it was a very large house with to me anyway, with a very large living room.
Yeah. Your dad was an engineer, a practical engineer.
Yeah.
And I guess your life sort of started off as being middle class and higher. What happened?
Oh, middle class, good safe place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he came here for what was the Caterpillar tractor company for BC, Morrison Tractor, and they finally, at the Depression, took a long time to get to Kelowna. But when it came, then everything absolutely vanished, and my mother died at the same time, and there were 4 kids. And this was, by this time, 1932, 33. And so he had to decide what he was going to do with his 4 kids. And my little brother was 5, and I was 8, and the 2 girls were 11 and 12, I think, fighting for space among the 2 of them. And it lasted all their lives. So he had kids at that age to handle.
You found yourself in the bush, so to speak, in Oliver, just below McIntyre Bluff. Mm-hmm. What was there for you to move into in the winter you moved down?
We went down the valley, and he brought a truckload of furniture piled so high that when we got to Vassaw Lake, and by the way, it was February of 33, the lake was frozen, it was 14 below zero, and he had to unload with the guy who was helping him. He had to unload this truck at the overhanging rock at Vassaw Lake and then put it all back together. And obviously when he got down to the property, he just dumped everything out in the snow and the house furniture in the snow on the bare ground and threw a tarp over it. And when we came down, my brother and me, first of all, this was a day or 2 later, he had 2 tents up with a stove and some bunks worked out, and there we were on a bench just above the Okanagan River. He had about half a mile of riverfront, I see in his notes.
I've got a picture here that this is the plumbing of the Woodworth family for a period of time in Oliver, and this looks like, I don't know, this architecturally, it's light, it's flexible, it's airy. And like every good outhouse should be.
Oh, it's air conditioned, I tell you. Yeah. Besides that, we built it with cedar, with the box shuck, you know, the apple
They
box
make
shuck.
apple boxes out of.
Yeah, that's right. And they dumped all the stuff from where the guy did the box making. All the surplus stuff, the nails and the wire and the sawdust and all the rest, were dumped in a packing house dump right across the river from us, the McLean and Fitzpatrick, Mac and Fitz packing house. And,
so you were scrounging over there for a lot of stuff.
We went over there with a magnet and we pulled all the box nails out that had fallen into the sawdust pile, and we collected all the wire for wiring things together. We were a haywire ranch, and I always wanted to write that book about haywire ranch, but we were so poor we couldn't afford haywire. Haywire was what prairie people had, because they took their hay and they made the cubes.
The bales out of it, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. So it was baling wire, but we couldn't afford that.
You just had to scrounge it out of the dump and use it to wire things together.
Yeah.
Like
And
this bridge. This is a suspension bridge across the Okanagan River.
That's quite right. Well, that made it easier to get to town. We didn't have to go winding around the base of the hillsides. But that wire that was cable that came out of the bush on our bottom land, and it had disappeared when the West Kootenai power lines went down. And I remember the night that happened, the lights were on and then the lights were off, and there was a rumbling over the whole width of the mountains on both sides of the valley. Anyway, the cable was on the ground, and it somehow ended up in the bush where we lived. So when he wanted to build a suspension bridge, then the cable appeared, and he put a dead man not a real dead man, on both sides.
It's an architectural term.
And then he suspended the cables, and then you used the wire to tie it together, and then you scrounged boards wherever you could to walk on it.
Going to take a break here, but obviously with the kind of mindset now that you have it is possible for a good family to suffer tragic loss and corporate failure and to sink to what would apparently be pretty low levels, you can recover from that. I want to pick that up after we come back from the break, okay?
Yeah.
We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts talking with John Woodworth about John Woodworth. What happens to a young guy when he suffers, or he lives in a family that has suffered these kinds of downs at this stage? Inferiority complexes or anything like that?
I think there's a degree of that. I remember having to start school in what was a farm school, and I was used to the red brick school here in Kelowna. I was in grade 3 or something like that. And I remember thinking, going to school, well, I know how to handle a flush toilet, and I'm not sure most of these kids do, because they're farm kids, and they all got outhouses. But I was a little better off in that race. I didn't have a red school bucket, a lunch bucket. It would be a lard pail. Well, we didn't use lard, I guess. And I didn't have blue jeans. I wore shorts and had dirty knees all the time. That wasn't easy to handle at all. And Dad wouldn't go on relief. He figured he should look after himself and his family. So my brother and I'd take to peeking in the windows of the odd house where they were on relief, and they actually ate meat and things like that. So I never needled him about it, but yeah, it hurt.
So when it came time for you to graduate from school, did you have any kind of belief of what your future held for you?
The war was on, and there wasn't any doubt about it at all. And the Pearl Harbor had happened, and everybody obviously was going to do what they could. And my school buddies were being reported missing, those that went in the Air Force.
Yeah.
And so it was there, and there wasn't any college. There wasn't any Okanagan University College to get people out of the small communities, among other things. So I joined up.
And obviously, you even left school. You tell a story about skipping school every time a plane landed at the airport.
Well, yeah, I built model airplanes, and a lot of kids did, you know. But at school, if a plane landed on the Oliver Airport, and at that time that airport was built for the first Trans-Canada Airlines, not for a service serving the valley, but like Grand Forks and Princeton, these were the emergency airstrips.
To land in case the plane encountered problems.
Yeah, so we'd kids skip school and go down and look at the airplanes, you know.
So it was logical you'd go into the Air Force.
Oh, hell yes.
Yeah.
There wasn't any other way as far as I was concerned.
When you got out of the Air Force, you'd had your taste of flying.
Yeah.
But now you had a life ahead of you. How did it occur to you to become an architect?
By the fact that I really wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a journalist, and I'd worked in the Oliver paper as from age 12 on until I joined up.
Were you a printer's devil there?
Well, you'd call it that. I ran the Mimeo machine and, you know, by hand, and delivered the paper and dodged the dogs and things like that.
You wanted to be a writer?
Well, yeah, the thing is, my dad wrote stories on the South Okanagan for the Vancouver province, and Wally Smith, who was the editor-publisher of the Oliver News, he did the stories for the Vancouver Sun, so I was, you know, tag along with them on the stories occasionally. My grandfather in Nova Scotia was the editor and publisher of the Windsor Tribune, which was the county newspaper, and he was a voice in the land, because there was no television and all those things. So I liked the typewriter. I smuggled it in the Bombay of the Liberator that we scared ourselves practically to death flying across to Prestwick. And so I wrote during the war. I just, you know, took courses and things.
Pounded out articles.
Anyway, I married the girl that I wrote to most of all afterward, who was Nancy, was already graduated and a teacher, and she came to teach in Oliver. One day, before we were married, she said, about you being a writer, what do you want to write about? I said, well, I don't know. I like to write. Yeah, but what are we going to eat? Sort of thing, you see.
Women are good for that. I'm really very good at focusing you on survival and success.
Well, she said, I'm an English graduate. I'll teach you to write. And she was writing for CBC at the time, so, you know. So I became an architect because across the science chemistry table was Bill Tassie from Vernon, and he had apparently sized me up as somebody who would see him through the chemistry course, and I hated chemistry. I hated the smell, and I didn't like Norman Campbell, the CBC Norman Campbell, who ran it. He was pretty tough with us. And I said, what are you taking? Bill said he was taking architecture, and I probably said, well, what's that? That's how much I knew or was interested in architecture. But then I took the various tests, and they said, well, you could be a doctor, your uncle's a doctor, you could be a lawyer, you could be an engineer, and so on. So architecture, since we built things on our farm days, and, you know, after a while it got to be fun, sure.
Going to take a break here, be back in just a second, because your writing continued while you were being a student architect, and we're going to talk about that right after this break. Don't go away. Welcome back. Talking with John Woodworth about the transitions of life, I guess. You're taking architecture, University of British Columbia. Mm-hmm. You and Nancy are building a house. You're writing articles for Western Homes. What other kinds of...
Well, I actually started with Canadian Homes and Gardens. And when I'd done that, then the Vancouver people, Howard and Mitchell, started up Western Homes, and Western Homes and Living, and I was the architectural editor. So I brought in money, and we were living on the Veterans Allowance, you know, about $90 a month, and the first child had arrived. And that's how I got into the writing end of it. And then I got in trouble with the head of the School of Architecture because he said, do you want to be an architect or a writer? You know, you better make up your mind. We don't think you're serious about being an architect. Well, I was.
So did you back off from the writing and just dedicate yourself to
No, I kept on doing it. When I graduated, I had a lineup of people wanting me to build houses for them, and I taught, or to design them, and I also taught the Vancouver night schools, and I did some travel talking for UBC. So
You
it
also
didn't
wrote
hurt me
under
a ton.
an AKA. What was your AKA?
Well, I wrote under a couple of them. John Duncan was one, and that was of the BC lumber manufacturing various companies they had, all of which was to promote using BC woods, like hemlock, the Cinderella wood, and the cedar with its background, and using small pieces, odd pieces of wood and that sort of thing.
Did this go along with sort of an architectural philosophy you had, that it didn't all have to be 2x4s, 8 feet long?
I've never even thought about that. Well, I think it went back to the farm partly because we built out of jack pine poles that came off Mount Baldy, and that's the same fire that ended up at Little White, and all these standing, beautiful, very small logs, you know, about that big around.
So
we
you
built a lot of buildings on the farm, and my brother and I mucked up a few by climbing all over them when they were plumb. They were then unplumbed, you know.
But did you carry that philosophy into your work as a practicing
Well, I
architect?
don't think I realized that I was, but looking back on it, I think I owe a lot to my dad, with whom I did not get along very well, but I think I owe a lot to him because he knew how to build, and he knew how to build with practically nothing. I did, you know, I won a low-cost housing award for 2 or 3 houses we did at Poplar Point. And that was because there were families with 6 kids and no money for down payment. And we maneuvered with the landowner and so on and set them up so they could get into these houses.
You won an award too, I think, for prefab ski chalets, which you showed off at Expo 67.
Yeah, they didn't get to Expo 67, but they wanted me to bring one of them, but it was getting too expensive. But these were prefabricated cabins that you could tow behind a, I think it was a 3/4 ton truck you could haul them with on the highway.
They had a wonderful little roof, the peaky roof structure folded down on the sides.
They had to meet the highway regulations, and I think we were limited to 12 foot at the sides. You know, they came in at the bottom like that, and 14-foot clearance above, and so on. It was a marvelous experience. We built, I don't know, 25 or 30, and then they decided that it was not an economical venture, and we better get on with real life.
Other things.
Yeah.
Well, you said you've probably designed 150, 200 homes for people, but this is a treadmill that you're on, and maybe you don't remember them all?
I don't remember them all, no. And you had me looking into the history of them and thinking, I wonder who that person was. You know?
And when we take a look at the Okanagan, I mean, in Kelowna alone, I look at the credit union building across from the United Church. I look at the City Hall. I look at the Kelowna Community Theater.
Yeah.
These are all Woodworth architectural buildings.
Yeah, and I think I always like to say we designed it, because in the end, the designing and the building is a team exercise, and you depend on all those other people you work with. So you may end up, well, you don't even end up with your name on the building most of the time, but you end up knowing you had the thrill and the pleasure, the excitement of designing that building in a piece of airspace and bare ground, and it doesn't matter what anybody says, particularly if it works. Like the community theater, isn't a kid or a family in this house, in this city, that hasn't been affected by the community theater. And so you have that choice position. If you've done a half-decent job, it's a very nice position. So you can put up with all the other criticism and everything else.
So while you're creating these buildings that are kind of edifices and tributes to you, you're still writing books, and in the remodeling game, you're really talking to the guy who owns the little house who needs to kick out a wall. How many copies of the remodeling game sold?
I think it was something like 27,000 copies in 3 printings. And I guess I could have gone on in that field when television came along.
You could have done the remodeling game TV series.
Well, I probably could have.
Now you think that would have kept you busy enough. But your love of the Okanagan said things have to be observed out here.
Yeah.
Do you know what's going on up there? And
Well, I wrote a book because I was booklet for the Okanagan Smeltmean Park Society. It was called Is Everything All Right Up There? And it's like the mother who says, pull up those pants up there, you know, clean up that bedroom up there, you see. And that was a concern for the amount of clear cutting that was showing up. These great swatches, which you see from the ski hills. No, I'm a pilot. You see, this is really what it is. I was trained as a general reconnaissance pilot. And so I've seen all these areas from the air, and I see the larger scene. To me, the Okanagan Valley is a ditch in a great plateau of mountain ranges about 5,000, 6,000 feet. And we live here working away at the bottom of the ditch on the water, because there must be lots of it because of that big lake. But we don't know where the water comes from, and we didn't know whether we were really getting replanting, because we were getting it in the newspapers for quite a while.
but not on the hills. You're a busy man.
I got into the concerns for large-scale planning partly because Dr. Peter Oberlander set up the planning school at UBC. And Peter kept thinking of this valley and telling us about it and comparing it with the Tennessee Valley in the USA, in the Tennessee Valley Authority. He said, do you have an opportunity in this larger picture? Not just to me, but it sure sunk with me, and I got great marks from him when I did my various exams and things like that. And so it was there. And you know, if you're there, and you know you can do certain things, and you know how to get some things done, well, you don't want to waste it, you know. And you owe it to your community.
Well, you haven't wasted it, John. Darn good work.
No, but I'm going to be 80 this summer, and I sat on the Nature Trust Board for 25 years. Most of the guys, the ex-generals and so on that board, they were 10, 15 years older than me, and they weren't thinking of stopping at all. They were ready to go in the bush and get in an airplane and go anywhere. Up to the Spatsizi, all over the place.
Well, then the next 20 years should be very interesting for you. Thank you very much for being here.
My friend, thank you.
John Woodworth, my very special guest on this edition of Pioneers and Places. Thank you very much for watching. See you again another time.